Included in the large Latino community we just talked about are millions of people who work very hard for a living at very low wages. And they, in turn, are part of an even larger population that economists call economically distressed. Translation, barely making a living, barely able to pay for the basic necessities of life: housing, food, medical care, transportation. There are almost 23 million households like that in America, 60 million individuals, including 18 million children. They've gone virtually unmentioned in this campaign. Obama and McCain both talk about the middle class. These people are the forgotten class, and my next guest says it's time to bring them into the national conversation. Michael Zweig teaches economics at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where he also runs the Center for Study of Working Class Life. This report he's just published should be must-reading for Obama and McCain and their circle of advisors from inside Washington and Wall Street. Welcome to the Journal.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about the people in your study. What do they do for a living?
Well, these are people we see every day, we rely on every day. They're cashiers and truck drivers and home health care workers. These are people who are janitors. They're just ordinary people who are, maybe they're poor, but they're not necessarily poor. What we did is we said, let's take a look at the lives of people who really need help, and how can we define who they are? How can we understand who these people are? So we started with housing, and we said, according to the U.S. government, you're not supposed to spend more than 30% of your income on housing. Now, I know people said, well, that's just nuts. Who can do that? But that is, in fact, the government standard. So what we did is we said, we'll take that government standard, which has been around for years, and say, let's look at people whose incomes do not allow them to get above the bottom of the housing market without spending more than 30% of their income. And that's the numbers that you were just talking about.
Give us a snapshot of their lives.
Well, you know, some of these people are really having, as you say, a hard time making ends meet. We were talking in our work not only looking at data, but we were actually talking to workers. And they talk about, there's a guy who works in a grocery store, all right? He's a stocker in a grocery store. And he sees people come in who he knows don't have pets, and they're buying cat food. Well, they're buying it for themselves because they can't afford anything else. We have people who live and work on Long Island, but they can't afford to live there. They move to Pennsylvania in order to find a place to live, but they're still commuting back to New York to work. We, have people who, when we talk about, well, what about savings? Can you put any money away? And this was a home health care worker who just it came out of her mouth. Who could afford that? So these are people who are really at the edge. And we need to talk about them. We need to have economic policies that address their condition and their needs.
You say in here that another million of them are about to lose their homes to foreclosure.
Well, this foreclosure problem is, of course, at the heart of the Wall Street financial crisis. But people sometimes forget that foreclosure problem hasn't gone away, that those junk mortgages were being issued and were being pushed out at an increasing pace until the spring of 2007. But they have a 2-year reset, right, when those low terms come into these more onerous terms. So what we're going to see between now and the spring of 2009 is an acceleration of foreclosures in ordinary people's working neighborhoods. And I think that is something we really need to pay attention to, and that's been totally off the charts, off the board.
Why aren't we hearing about these people in this campaign?
Well, I think it's hard for the country to get past the language of the middle class. Every politician wants to talk about the middle class, but when you actually hear who they're talking about the bus driver, they're talking about the waitress in the cafeteria where they were eating. They're talking about people who are the janitors who are picking up the trash out of the waste baskets in the evening. Those aren't middle class people. That's the working class in this country. Most people in this country aren't working class people. The work that I've done is about 62% of the labor force in the United States are just ordinary working people.
But Obama and McCain keep talking about the middle class, the middle class. Are you saying that middle class is already disappearing?
Well, I'm saying that the middle class is there as professional people, as small business owners, as managers. When we talk often about the disappearing middle class, we're talking about good jobs that are disappearing. But those are working class jobs. It isn't that the working class is disappearing. The conditions of life of working people are being pushed down, and that's been going on for 35 years.
You call for more government spending on these people, some $220 billion, in fact. What would that do?
Well, the study comes out of a desire to understand a stimulus package. And people may remember in the old days before all this Wall Street stuff was happening, people were talking about a stimulus package that could boost the economy, it could take us more towards full employment. And the task here was that we took on in the Center for Study of Working Class Life was to design a stimulus package that would take the country towards economic prosperity, but would do it in a way that immediately served the needs of the low-wage workers in this country, or economically distressed workers. So we have a number of $220 billion that is divided into three pieces. We have one piece of about $60 billion that increases the existing income support programs in the country, like the Earned Income Tax Credit. This is a program very important. Almost no one ever talks about it. Extending unemployment compensation, extending food stamps, and housing subsidies. That would help that community, and that would put money in their pockets, and they would spend that money, and that would help to stimulate the economy. The second piece is to send $50 billion to the states. The states are in desperate trouble here in New York and California, around the country, and what do? They cut Medicaid, they cut the programs that are important for working people. So if we could restore those budgets with the requirement that that money be spent on Medicaid and other programs that are beneficial for working people, that would be another part of this stimulus that would also go directly to the people who need it. So that's $110 billion. The other $110 billion of this stimulus package is checks, another round of checks. But instead of sending the checks, as was done earlier this year, to basically everybody in the country, why don't we just focus that money on the people who really need it, and let's send it to the bottom half of the income distribution. 55 million families in the United States and households.
How many?
55 million households.
Right.
That's half. And they make $50,000 a year or less. That's who we're talking about. Send that money out, and we would stimulate the economy. You would have time to get infrastructure projects going, which take a year or two to get going. And when those infrastructure projects are in place, some of these other transfers can be backed off.
But with all due respect, Michael, who's going to buy this? I mean, we're spending